Now we're just getting with one back. So this is Professor Osi Mokrin, who is at University of Haifa in Israel, but she's visiting here on sabbatical at Harvard. I think some of the misinformation people probably know her because she was here last week, 2 weeks ago. For the last misinformation seminar.
3 weeks ago, a month ago, I don't know.
Maybe longer. Time flies when you're fighting for viewers. So she's in information systems, and she's been coming to the NetSci conference. I know I saw her there before I came here.
This is where we met in Helsinki.
And she has a background also with kind of other people in network science, mostly in Israel, but from kind of a electrical engineering history a little bit. Yuval is sort of internet. We all did internet at some point.
I worked with Shlomo.
Shlomo, and so she'll be talking today about a new method she developed related to hidden knowledge, and I'll let her take over.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you, Lois, and thank you guys for inviting me. So this was actually the view from my office window in Haifa. We just moved buildings.
Just trying to make that show.
Yeah, I really like it.
It's working.
That's when it's not snowing.
It's not snowing here. Everybody was, frightening me. You'll come to Boston, and yeah, okay. So my lab is Scan Lab, Big Data Lab for the research of social content and networks. We work on the sort of intersection of cognition and network science. For example, in cognition, I work on perception of ranking signals and high-dimensional emotional data. We have very interesting projects there. And during COVID, we developed a method for interaction-based algorithms to study the interplay dynamics between the virus and the changing temporal network underneath. But today I'm going to talk about unsupervised knowledge discovery using information theory. Okay, and we'll be part of the view and talk about unknown knowns. And let's think about a situation where you guys built a recommender system for music. And you give one of your friends an opportunity to try it out. And the recommender finds that your friend is really into, early pop, rock, stuff like that. But for some reason, the friend doesn't have the Beatles. So naturally, the recommender recommends the Beatles. So your friend gives you back the recommender and says, oh, it's broken. What was the recommender's mistake, in your opinion?
He knows the Beatles, he just doesn't like it.
Exactly. He knows the Beatles. He just doesn't like it. And how do we know that that friend knows the Beatles? Everybody knows the Beatles, right? It's very popular. So how can we determine which popular items you know of but you choose not to use, or don't you choose not to use those features just do not exist in your feature set. So given a collection of entities that are members of a population, we pose that a population can be used to learn about the entities in it, the members. And what we say is the population prevalent features that are underused or missing from the entities can be used to describe the entities just as well as the prevalent, more prevalent ones. Okay? And building on this idea, I want to go from, let's say we're talking about film reviews, people who wrote reviews for films, and I want to identify them. So I take this guy is talking about favorite drama in film, but the population, film is really the most prevalent term, but right after it is movie. So if that guy never writes movie, I can characterize him or her by that, okay? And if we apply the system, we want to go from that to the signature that will tell us that users, whatever, likes really Bond and Pokemon and villains, but talks less than the population about horror and comedy and laughter. Okay? So how do we do that? We created a method, Latent personal analysis, which is a very fast method. I'll explain in a second why. For representing entities in a population in an effective and meaningful way. And the entity's representation consists of a measure of how dissimilar they are from the population and the features that most distinguish them from the population. Okay? Okay, so I want to go from individuals to some aggregate. And you see you film, art, actor, whatever. And then I want to show that, for example, individual one talks more than the population about awards, but less than the population about director. And if I want to do that, there's some sense of a distance that I need to put here on a per element distance that I want to use. And the question is which? Okay. So there are a few challenges when we want to find the per element distance between users and the population. The main challenge is that the population, being the aggregate of all the entities, would be much larger than each of the vectors of the users, right? If you think about IMDb, the example before, the vector of all the terms that are used is 400,000 terms, but personal vocabularies are 1,500, maybe 2,000, not more than that. So that's very large. And we have some requirements. We want to differentiate well between individuals. So when we tried distance between rankings, for example, we took RBO, which is a very popular one, we found that it didn't differentiate well between individuals. It mapped all individuals to the same sort of divergent or distance. And we want popular terms that are underused or missing to be part of the feature set of the entity. So when we used TF-IDF with cosine similarity, it never found them. And we want different individual vocabulary sizes to not really affect the result. Some people write more, some people write less. This is an unsupervised method for different sizes of vocabularies or whatever entity sizes. So I don't want to take that into account. And when we took time frequency with Manhattan distance, you know, this had a very, very big effect. So we couldn't use that. So what we want to do is we want to think about it in a different way. We want to think about it using information theory. And the way we want to think about it is to say that the population is what we expect from term distribution, from terms or features in the population or in the space. And we want to see which features most surprise us at each of the entities. Okay? So I want to use relative entropy. But if I want to use a relative entropy, I need the feature sets to be of similar sizes. They have to be the same space, taken from the same space. So information systems, usually what they do is they have a solution of adding epsilon values to missing values where otherwise there would be a zero value. And we improved on that a little bit. And what we did is not only we used epsilon value where there was missing values and normalized the vector, we also bounded the entropy of the vector by how much, we also bounded epsilon to not add too much to the entropy of each vector. Because we add values, we change the entropy. Okay? And the result is a system like that, where we have input, we have the documents, we add epsilon values for missing corpus terms, and then we calculate the divergence, and we create two things. We create a divergence for each of the entities, in this case, the documents, and we find the top n elements or features that contributed to that divergence and use them to create a signature or presentation for the entity. Okay. And this signature would actually be the dimension reduction representation of the entity. And I will show you soon. And if you think about the process, so far we created very slim representation for entities in a space using additions and logarithms. This is very fast. Okay. We then show that the divergence is the LPA divergence of the entities is significantly different than just if we take a sample from the population and find that distance. So this is characteristic of the entity. Okay. And I want to give you an example, qualitative example, so we will understand. In here, it's from information, it's from Digital Humanities, right? So the book Robinson Crusoe, we take it, and then the elements or the features are the terms that appear in the book. Of course, we do bag of words and we clean everything, we remove stop words, etc. The book is the population, so we see that great is the most prevalent term, and then found. Friday, of course, is prevalent, and God is prevalent. And the chapters are the entities. So we like to create signatures for each chapter. And we find that in the chapter where Friday arrives, that's almost all what the chapter is talking about. So much more than prevalence. But then in this chapter, Captain is mentioned less, and Crusoe's mind and condition and the days that are passing are mentioned much less. Also, in the last chapter, in a book that's supposed to be a spiritual journey, laugh is mentioned much more than in the rest of the book, but God much less. So that would give you an indication of what we're going to do, but now we're going to take you to big data applications. And we want to go to IMDb, where we have 4,000 users that each of them authored at least 30 reviews. So we create an entity by all the reviews that a specific user authored. And we have almost 1 million reviews and almost 4,000 films. And we want to find whether we can find sock puppets account, which are, same author operating several personas. And the idea is the following. This is actually authorship attribution in a way. And our idea is that personal style can be derived by finding how personal vocabulary is different from the population, from how the population is talking. I just showed you that the distance or the divergence is the quality of the user and would be significantly different from a sample from actually we did that on this data set. So we know that if we take the elements that most differentiate the user, we might actually find sort of a dimension reduction representation for how the user is using the language in this population, in this domain. And what we do is we employ a method that is usually done to find an unsupervised way to find users. We take 1,000 users and 10 of them we halve. And we want to try and find that these two halves belong to the same author, right? And the way we do that, we compute the distance. So these are really short. We take 500 terms per user. So these are really short representations. And some of the values are in a plus and some of the values are in a minus, saying that for that user, this is missing or underused. So we compare the signatures of all users, and having 4,000 users compared to each other usually takes a lot of time. In our computer, one night, we were able to do that. It's just an L1 comparison between the signatures. And now we have a threshold. So if two signatures are closer than the threshold, we say that this is the same author. Okay. So these are the results when the threshold is average distance minus 1 standard deviation, 2, 3, and 4. And you can see that our method really converges very well and finds them very well. Okay. And when we went to IMDb and actually looked for sock puppets accounts using average minus 3 standard deviation as a threshold, we found 1,500 such counts. And here was really fast. We found 1,500 such accounts, and some of them it's easy to see because they identify as they give the same similar names, the same picture, you see the person. So we could have seen that. We found it well. Okay. There are other misinformation applications that we did, but I want to go to other stuff, so I will not talk about that now. Another area that we went to is the immune system. So what we did here is we have samples, tissue samples from different organs. We can create the B-cell repertoire of the body and then find the signature for each of the tissue samples, how it's different from the repertoire. So we reiterated known examples, known results that said that the gut organs different from the lung, but we also found a third lymphatic branch. And something that is interesting, we found that the spleen, the spleen is the most similar to the repertoire of the human being. If you think about that, it's like it has from everywhere. And this actually talks with some people who think that this is actually where the process starts of the immune system. It actually resonates with that. Okay. So that we did on B cells, and then you can do it from music. If you remember, I started with the music recommender system, and then we went to Spotify 2017, countries listening habits, and we found that the Spanish-speaking countries sort of centered in one area. Here's Lithuania, Slavia, Estonia, Cyprus, Latvia, and these groups are mainly listening to popular music. So we know that because they're really closer to the distribution. Okay. And now I want to go temporal. And we want to do a method for temporal analysis of timelines and unstructured data. Usually when people analyze temporal data, they use time series. Recently, from the Dodds lab, they created rank turbulence divergence and story wrangler, where they took, I think, 15 years of Twitter. For each day, they took the 20 most frequent terms, and they compared them to each other. So this is comparing time beams, one time beam to the next. But we suggest to do something else, actually. We suggest a period-based latent timeline analysis where we take the timeline, divide a period into beams like everybody else, and we have the distribution for each of the beams. In our case, the main data set that we're going to work with is the State of the Union addresses of the presidents here for the last 232 years. The main challenge was that when we tried to work with epsilon values as before for comparing the time base to the mean value that we created, we create a mean, okay, forgot something. When we use LPA on text and stuff like that, it was not temporal, we used the aggregation, like the book, like we did with the book. Here, every time being is just as equal as other time beams. So we would like to take an average. So here we create an average over all time beam of all the elements, all the features, their mean value over the timeline. And now we want to compare that to the distribution and create the signatures. The problem is that here, in that case, small variability across time beings is highly affected by epsilon, the different epsilon values. So we wanted to go to another solution. And what we did, we used the Jensen-Shannon diversions, which create, I will show you in a second. So what we did is create a period mean, all the features, the average value of feature over the period. And then for each timeline, we use the Jensen-Shannon, which create an average between the distribution and the period mean, finds the KL to each of them, and then we have a divergence. So we have a divergence for each. Is everybody here familiar with Jensen-Shannon, or should I explain a bit more? Okay. So we have a divergence for each time being, and we can find, again, the features that most contributed to the difference. So there's a lot of stuff we can do. The first, what you see first, so the PM shows the most prevalent elements over the timeline. And I have it here. I think that, yeah, for the State of the Union, the terms, the 10 most, not popular, but their mean value is the highest over the period is state, government, year, Congress, United Nation, not together, people, country, American, and May, which is very interesting. And then when we create the distance between the signatures of all the presidents and compare them to each other and take the PCA of that, we find results that resonate very much with other results of people that combine style and content to compare the text and the style of different presidents. But two other things that it enables us to do is...
The clustering you get here is just simply age-based, right? In the sense that Clinton is next to Trump. Who would expect? Well, that's because they're roughly a few years apart as presidents, right?
Yeah, but Bush is not as close.
It's the same agent, right? It's different from Lincoln, right? So you have all the old presidents together, all the new presidents together,
True.
right? Independent of ideology, right?
True, but we have some people who are like Hoover, and if we look at the signatures, we can explain why is that, and I will show you in a second.
Perfect.
Yeah, we have qualitative explanation for what's the differences.
Mm-hmm.
For example, here, people talk more about child welfare, family, stuff like that. Mm-hmm. I have some examples that we show later. What we also can do is very fast visual change point detection and latent explore latent dynamics. And let me show you. Another data set. Here we have a data set of 30 years of world main death causes. So this is a time series. And if you look at illnesses, so this is the original time series. So it's kind of divergence, and over the years, they're very much similar to each other. But if we take the signatures, which are how specific time being, the values are different from the mean value, we see in 1994 that conflict became the main feature in the signature, and that correlates with what happened in Rwanda. And then in 2004, 8, and 10, we had forces of nature. So that's a very fast visual change point detection. Can we do it with unstructured text? So here's the State of the Union addresses. 2013, they stopped giving it as a letter and started talking. So tonight, it became a very strong term. 42, when they started, this is how a signature looks. They decided to go into the war. war-fighting enemy, Hitler, victory, Japanese production, and it took less about law, public, and government. And then 51, starting off the Korean War, 3 equivalent terms. So when we look at the last 30 years, they look pretty, very similar to each other. So we created a period based only for the 30 years, for these 30 years. And this is who? Who's the president here? 2001, 2003? It's Bush. So the first one was not because of 9/11. This is Clinton versus Bush. But then Bush's speeches were really different from each other because this year he was talking about policy, this year about 9/11, and here about the war in Iraq. So we see a lot of differences. This is the Clinton area and then the Trump, and we see this stuff. So there's a lot of signatures. If you want to go into the details, we can go later. We also have hidden dynamics. What I find is the terms that are most fluctuating. Now, these are not necessarily popular terms. You wouldn't find them any other way, right? How would you know that child is a fluctuating term? It's really in the popularity, in the frequency of terms, this is way like 200, 400, I don't know, 700. But what I do is I calculate the distances per time beam from the average, and I sum them, and then we rank them, and we found the most fluctuating terms. And then we can see that government is really fluctuating, and at the beginning, they didn't mention it much. And recently, in the last 30 years, they also don't mention it much. Okay, here's the frequency. And child is, people started to talk about children and family only in the last 30 years. Now, this is 2001, and we see, other things were important. But what happened during Obama's years? We would expect Obama to talk about children a lot. Obama talked a lot about family. He sort of used family where other people used children. And I want to introduce here another data set. This is LOCO, which is a large data set, was created and published online. We took it. It follows conspiracy theories, and look how they are mentioned also in the news. So we have mainstream articles and conspiracy articles. And Diana was extremely fluctuating. So we looked why. Every time in the news, something is happening with the royal family, they talk about Diana. But conspiracy theorists, they're very busy with Diana all the time. And the reason I introduce here the local data set is that it enabled me to find something that was really interesting. So we had 126 monthly time beams between 2010 and June of 2020. And COVID-19 appeared only in the last 6 time beams. It was the most prevalent term in the period mean. Any idea why? Over 10 years, that was the prevalent term, and we take averages. So this is very interesting. Most of the time beams have a lot of topics. You can think about them entropy-wise as being random. But in the last 6 months, there were 2 or 3 topics, tops, which is COVID-19, and they became the prevalent Okay. And I want to say that it made me think about an application. This is called for collaboration. So let's assume we have a group of people who are really, really thinking about flat Earth. So they find each other online and they become highly connected. We don't believe in flat Earth, but we're busy with a lot of stuff. Laszlo is talking about success, and Baruch is talking about stability, and I'm talking about the situation in Israel. And, we don't really, when someone new is coming to the network and looking, this small group that is very focused would gain more traction or more attention than us that have a lot of topics. And this is something that would be interesting to show. How actually small groups who are really only one-minded, one thing is interesting them. Even if they're not prevalent, they become bigger with time because they attract the newcomers. So this is something that would interest me to see. Okay. So just in summary, we find for an entity and timing the elements that must differentiate it. It's a measure of suppressibility and dimension reduction. There are many applications, and other applications that I didn't talk about is timeline compression and accelerating learning, and I would be happy to explain. And of course, I want to really thank Chagit Ben Shoshan and Uri Alon and Alex Abi, Lisa Mokrin, and Uri Berthold. And thank you. Try to be on time.
Questions? Break the ice, and so I'm curious, like you were saying that you do find actually many people who are under different names the same person, right? And then you said, hey, here are that you don't have the same name. So why is it that? Because I always thought that when you have multiple identities, you do so with a purpose.
So there was no ground truth to sock puppets, but some of them created accounts that we could actually clearly identify. So I gave them as an example.
Interesting. They just lost the password.
Could be, or they didn't want to. I have no idea. They wanted to. There's another application that we did there. Maybe it's time to talk about that. So I said that every user has their own distance or divergence from the population. Because the population is actually many people, the sort of many people coming together, and this is how the population is talking. So if we have an account that is offered by many people, several people, would it lack style? Would it be much closer, like a sample from the population? So we tried that. We took 30 books. And we created their sort of population term frequency of the 30 books aggregated. And this is the distance of every of the books. It's sort of a normal distribution. And now we create virtual books. We sample a chapter from each of the authors, from each of the books, and create 30 such books. And they all line here. So when we looked for accounts on IMDb that were really similar to the population, we were able also to see, when we looked at how often they wrote, that it was probably many people. And one of them, every review, this is why I remembered, every review was signed by a name, the same name. We looked the name on LinkedIn. And during that period where it was really highly active, that guy was a manager of public relations of some film company. So it was really, he wanted his supervisors to see that he was working hard. His entire crew was working for him.
A little You said in the kind of beginning when you introduced the method, this is kind of very technical. You talked about adding this epsilon. I guess that's a standard thing in information theory, but you're looking at like the top 20 differences. You're looking at either the ones that are common and are underrepresented, or that are overrepresented. Like the epsilon is being added.
Epsilon is just for missing values. And then I compare everything.
Okay.
So if something is rare in the population, has a really small term frequency, my epsilon would sort of cancel it. So it cancels the ones that that's the idea. But if something is very prevalent and I compare it to an epsilon value, the difference would actually send me.
Why is the epsilon instead of the zero necessary? Like what's the
Relative entropy doesn't work with
okay. Oh, right.
I have a question about wonderful collaborator number 4. You elaborate?
Uri Alon is a student, it's not the
Number 4.
Oh,
Thanks for a story.
I have a child. They are very smart. And they, because of Corona, dropped out of physics studies. They sit in Australia with their girlfriends. And they are bored. So from time to time, I give them math problems that none of my students is able to solve. And they're very good in solving like the bound for the epsilon, it's their idea, and they have many other, I think they were gonna write papers. They didn't finish their undergrads.
So if you have an unsolvable problem, Jonathan is the
Right. Yes, if you have an unsolvable.
Usually I use my children as an excuse for why I don't have time to solve.
No. That worked for years, and now it's the other way around.
So there's a payback.
There's a payback.
Stick the last one here.
Sure. So I have a question about the time series. I think it's very interesting to like apply this logic to the time series, and I completely agree with Laszlo, kind of like talking about it's all about the time as well, and the topics that are discussed during the State of the Union. That's why this presidents tend to cluster together, not because of ideology, but because of the issues that they face going on in the country at the time. But I wonder if there's any way to also look at the average across the time, but also take into account what's been said, let's say, the year before, and then expect that information that was like,
actually,
in 2022.
The PCA that you saw was actually, we created a mean for each, sort of a representation for each of the presidents. Yeah.
Or I wonder if the year would also matter, or if the term would matter. Because, like, for example, before like 2000, just at the beginning of that, would be very different than the one.
I've got to tell you, what I also thought that, and we did two things. Once we created signatures for the entire period, and then we created per 30 years signatures.
Okay.
Not that
Much of a difference.
I was very disappointed.
4 years would work for like a 10-year potential.
Yeah, but if you think that like 25 years would be almost as similar as 230 years, that is weird.
Presidents don't change. Like you get there, you have a job.
You do see that at the beginning, they're very, very busy with stuff. I can, where do I have that? Like, I don't know if you can see here. So this is the last year of Clinton. So he was talking about children much more than others. Was not talking, so government, as I said, is something that we less. Bush actually talked about government more like the average, so starting in this signature. So government and state is missing, and United is missing. And what I found is that, where is it? Yeah, here, the Democrats tend to talk about jobs. Obama, job, and then as soon as Biden arrived, there's job again, much more than the prevalence. So you can see things that are, there is room for further investigation here.
Republicans think that if they cut taxes, jobs will come, right? So they don't have to talk about it.
Yes. And Trump really talks about people a lot. Just names of people he invites people and then he talks about, he mentions their name really significantly more than other presidents. And he really, so they say May less in recent years, but he never says May. Like I found one instance of May in his first speech. And
he has no uncertainty.
yes. And that's, you know,
everything is will.
Yeah. And this is like mid-year, right, for Trump, for Obama, and so there were 8 years.
Well, then let's thank again the speaker.
Oh, there is a.
Let me do a little and then we can check.
Okay. Sorry about not boosting the microphone.